So what I thought I'd do, though, this evening is really talk a little bit about how something like this came to be. I'll talk a bit about the book itself and specifically some of the projects represented in the book and the case studies, and in the attempt to provide a kind of ground or framework against which we can try to go a little bit deeper into this discussion about the public. I should say that the project initially began with a symposium in 2006. This was a symposium titled Architecture and Situated Technologies at the Urban Center in New York, also organized by the Architectural League of New York. The Architectural League, for those of you who don't know, is an organization, an old organization, actually celebrating its 125th year anniversary when we did the symposium. They decided that there was a desire to find a way to let architecture or to bring architecture beyond itself, beyond the kind of disciplinary and professional frameworks which existed at the time in terms of what architecture was and what architects did. And so they commissioned a series of projects which were basically, and this was even, I'm not talking about the exhibit here, leading up to the symposium, which were to respond to a call which was looking for architecture and ... right? So what other disciplines, what other fields, what other concerns did architecture need to engage with to bring it beyond itself from at the close of the 20th century into the 21st century? So the Architecture and Situated Technologies Symposium brought together artists, architects, and others to begin to explore this question of situated technologies and how technologies which weren't any place, anywhere, which weren't the kind of blue sky version of the internet, let's say, that we had in the late 90s, but were actually culturally situated, were specific to a particular context, right? And whether it was the context of their use, or whether it was the context of their deployment. Situated technologies were a way for us to begin to think about a different way of thinking about technology, which wasn't this kind of virtual space that was so dominant in at least the profession in the late 90s, but was something which was able to understand this kind of hybrid condition between, on the one hand, sort of a networked, distributed electronic space, on the other hand, a kind of physical, haptic space, the space of everyday life, so to speak. So out of this symposium, and I guess as all good symposiums do, we had more questions than we had answers. And from this, we then developed a series of pamphlet-length publications, which we continue to publish, titled the Situated Technologies Pamphlet Series. Now, this was, again, a project which, the pamphlets are published via print-on-demand technology. They're free. You can go to the Situated Technologies website and download the PDFs. But they were also published by the Architectural League of New York, whatever publishing means in the context of print-on-demand publications. So we got about 3/4 of the way through, and Rosalie Ginevro, the executive director of the Architectural League, whose patience is extraordinary, still trying to wrap their heads around what was essentially still at the time, 2006, 2007, 2008, a fairly theoretical discussion, right? Which is to say that there weren't very many concrete examples of what we were talking about. And it tended to refer to some examples which existed in other contexts, but nothing which was explicitly addressing this question of situated technologies. So out of this came the idea that we were going to create an exhibition. And this exhibition was going to be one which didn't bring together existing work, but was actually involved in commissioning new work. And I think this was really the kind of foresight that an organization like the Architectural League had at that moment, which is to say that as an institution, as an organization, their role at that moment in time was not to curate an exhibition and bring together work that existed, but to actually provide concrete examples around which we can organize a debate. And that debate, public debate, would be one which would attempt to address the intersection of ubiquitous computing, architecture, in the context of tomorrow's cities. Now, it should be said that this, in a way, existed in parallel or alongside a discussion which we're probably familiar with around this idea of the smart city. Right? Is there anyone in the room who has not heard of this term smart city? No, of course not. IBM just invested $250 million in an advertising campaign, right? So we all know the smart city. Whether it's IBM, you can insert Sapient or any of these large technology players, right? And this is part and parcel of the problem, right? The idea about introducing this notion of the sentient city was one to try to look for alternate trajectories for technological development and begin to interrogate why isn't it that architects, urban designers, planners are more engaged in imagining, like I like to say, occupying the imaginary of this near future city. So the exhibition consisted of 5 projects which were commissioned through a open call for proposals. This open call received 152 proposals from around the world, which from 22 different countries. And from that, a selection panel of 9 people chose 5 different projects which were in some way trying to map out different trajectories for thinking about the integration of ubiquitous computing in urban contexts. Now, one of the things I should say, we've got this collage here, which is maybe not so well represented in this image, but a conscious reference for us was Living City, which was an exhibition organized by Archigram in 1963 at the Institute for Contemporary Art in London. And Living City was an attempt to look at the flotsam and jetsam of everyday urban life in the 60s in London, specifically the kind of pop culture, the influence of the more ephemeral conditions of the city at that time, and to try to provoke architecture, to provoke the profession of architecture to begin to embrace something which it looked at as an anathema to the practice of architecture, which was at the time, obviously, fairly concerned, very preoccupied with the formal articulation of space and material. I mean, this is, as we have a group of architects in the room, so, think of Louise Sert, right? Can our city survive? The idea of a kind of rational, optimal, efficient city, which through various programs and agendas could be actuated. Archigram was looking for a way to actually reclaim the vitality of the city, of the contemporary city. So we have things like this is a collage from their Instant City project, Urban Action Tune-Up, the collage, 1969. Ron Heron. So the issue, and one of the things that I think is amazing about this collage is that we're seeing things like sort of large-scale projection screens, these kind of temporary structures which come and take over scaffolding systems, news feeds, and so forth, right? And so we're seeing in the moment in the 60s, there's actually a kind of a predisposition, almost a kind of a premonition of the kind of informational overlay that was to come in the 21st century. One might say that to a certain extent, many of these ideas have been theorized, right, by architects in the 60s, such as Archigram, such as Archazum, and others in this general area. But in fact, the difference being that today, as we reach the 21st century, this technology is actually within our reach, right? It has become small, it has become cheap, it has become accessible, and it's become open to speculation by people who are non-experts, right? Or people who don't necessarily work for a large research and development corporate lab funded by IBM. So again, as I think was so eloquently introduced in the introduction, the idea with the exhibition was really to try to find ways beyond just this desire to consume, right, or to control, right? What other strategies exist for the development of the sentient city? So I'm going to just talk a bit about each of the case studies that we commissioned as a prelude to a kind of larger discussion about this question of public and publicness. The first project I'll discuss is amphibious architecture. This is by a collaboration between David Benjamin and Suyin Yang of The Living, and Natalie Jeremijenko of the X-Design Environmental Health Clinic. And the project looks, here we go, this is a good place to start. This is the East River in New York. You're looking at the Williamsburg Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, and the Brooklyn Bridge in the distance. And what they propose is a series, basically an interface to water quality and the environments beneath this kind of reflective surface that so often in cities is understood as a mirror, as something which exists to reflect the city above it, right? So the project on one level looks at how do we begin to think of architecture itself as an interface, as this surface of water itself becoming another facade of the city in a sense. What one has is a series of tubes which are floating within the water. At the base of these tubes there are sensors which are picking up the presence of fish, but also monitoring the water quality. So the project literally submerges the sentient city underwater, right? Asks us to extend not only where we define the boundaries of what constitutes the city, right? The city is not just buildings, right? Streets, sidewalks, infrastructures like subways and whatnot, but it's also the natural environment, the kind of natural systems that physical city interfaces with. And in this case, enables us through using something as simple as a mobile phone to text message these fish and actually begin to engage the fish as a constituent element of the city, almost as a citizen of the city. So the project proceeds by one, you encounter these buoys floating out in the East River from the sidewalk, right? And this is the FDR Drive. This is the east side of Lower Manhattan. And then through an interface via the mobile phone, can actually access real-time information about the water quality beneath that surface, right? But also identify the number and types of fish there, right? Now, obviously, this is a conceit, right? The idea that no one is actually interacting or interfacing with the fish in the water, but it raises the questions that in the 21st century city, what counts as a citizen, right? And what counts as the city? Where do we understand the boundaries of that city and the ways we can interact with it? The next project is a project by Hack Design and Research, Usman Hack, and it's called Natural Fuse. And I'll just read briefly from the introduction here. Natural Fuse is a micro-scale carbon dioxide overload protection framework that works locally and globally, harnessing the carbon sinking capacities of plants. Basically, what Natural Fuse is electronic circuit breakers. These plants here are connected to the internet, and through a network of friends that you've established, you all create this shared carbon sink, this resource, which enables you to, in a sense, use electricity. There's a LED lamp connected to this. And as long as everyone is collaborating and sort of being conscious of how much energy is being used, right, the plants survive, right? They're watered automatically. But the moment when one sort of exceeds a certain level of consumption of electricity, the network itself starts to kill the plants, right? So in this ultimately what happens is the plant has 3 lives. You get an email first from the offender, right, which is automatically sent to you, and it says, well, so-and-so has been using and a sort of extraordinary amount of electricity, and so therefore your plant has been designated as the circuit breaker in the system, and the plant is killed, right? So the project really looks at this question of shared resources, right? Shared, in this case, energy and tries to make palpable the idea that this is a kind of collective problem as opposed to an individual problem, right? So based on this kind of more horizontal notion of the commons, where this notion of a kind of social coercion becomes significant, becomes important, right, in the way that we collectively manage these resources, not from an individual standpoint. All right, this is probably my favorite interface on this project. I don't know if you can see it. This is a little knob here, and it doesn't show up so well in the video, but I can read it. This is an off position. This position that is selfless, and then this is your selfish position, right? So you decide, but you decide, but individually, but you have a kind of collective implication which is derived from it. Series of studies which they, over the course of a year, I should mention that each of these projects had a year from the moment when they were commissioned to the moment that the exhibition opened. And the book presents the research that transpired in this course of time. So you have images of the different plants that they were studying, trying to identify what would be the most efficient way to kill them. In what ways can they also potentially be regenerated? That actually never ended up working out. And finally, the decision on which plant would be optimal for this condition. Okay. The next project, Urban Digestive Systems, Trash Track. This is by the Sensible City Lab at MIT. And Trash Track addresses this condition of waste, the removal chain from cities, right? We know quite a lot about how things get to us in cities, the supply chain of cities. But ironically, we actually don't know that much about the digestive systems, right? Where stuff goes once we're done with it. And so Trash Track asks a very simple question, which is to say, what happens when your trash is no longer out of sight, out of mind? And what they do is they take these smart tags and attach them to articles of trash to begin to try to find out where these things go once they're discarded. So for example, we have a coffee cup, which maybe our relationship lasts 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And this coffee cup then is discarded and it's out of sight, out of mind. Their question is, once you embed these objects with at least some ability to report back, right, to give them an authority of a voice, in a sense, of where they've gone, how does this change the way we think about articles of trash, right? How does it change the way we think about our relationship to that coffee cup? To what extent is it something that potentially we reuse, for example? And so the project developed these 3,000 of these tags in partnership with Cisco Systems and Waste Management, which is a large waste removal company in the US. Actually, it's a transnational company. And literally began to map the end-of-life experience of things like a cardboard box, plastic cones. There was an old sneaker which was tagged. Where did the sneaker make it to? Ultimately, Arlington, Oregon. And so 3,000 of these pieces of trash have been tracked. And it's an ongoing project. They produced this in Seattle. There was a smaller deployment in New York City, and then in London as well. The project continues to go on, but primarily a data visualization project. But in this context, trying to visualize again, what is the digestive chain of a city look like, right? What does that system look like? Yeah, too smart city. What happens when the city is actually not just a smart city, but it's a too smart city? The city is too smart. And if we take, in this context, the simple question of street furniture, park benches, trash cans, street signs, what are the design criteria we need when they start to become behaving artifacts, when they start to have behaviors, when they start to have characteristics? When, for example, in this case, let's take the trash can, which we can see a little bit here. What happens when the trash can actually has a preference for the type of trash it will consume, and it spits back things which don't meet its criteria, right? What is that interaction like, right? what are the design criteria we need for public agencies, right? Municipal agencies which are developing these artifacts. Here's the Too Smart bench, which if one is sitting on the bench for longer than 15 minutes actually ejects you from the bench, right? Or this street, the Too Smart sign, which literally follows you as you're moving around the space, continuing to sort of bark these different orders at you. And once it attracts your attention, sort of moves into a more steady state where you're transfixed in relationship to a series of no's and detours and so forth. But again, in a kind of whimsical way, the project begins to, ask, okay, if we're going to have something as simple as a smart bench or a smart trash can, what is that interaction like? Right? What is the behavior? What are the characteristics? And most importantly, how do we think about, what are the design criteria by which we can say, this is well designed, this is not well designed. Finally then, we can, here's Julian Peak, yes. So I don't know what's going on with this tree, but they did, again, their research was really looking into these existing elements in the city. Did a whole series of Lego prototyping, and then what they call Wizard of Oz testing, where you literally, this is the no-tech version, and you have your little mock-up of the trash can, and here's, I guess, the wizard behind there. Again, beginning to look at, the question is, how do you begin to sort of study some of these interactions? Okay. Finally, Breakout, Escape from the Office. Breakout looks explicitly at this question of public space and asks the question, what happens if the entire city is your office? Whether that's a good idea or not, maybe we can discuss, but the project looked at what different kinds of ways can we think about this phenomena of co-working, which literally is the process where people are sharing office space, desk space in a very informal office setting. And using this model is something to reinvigorate public spaces of the city, which are used for other conditions. So the project combines things like social softwares, such as a kind of meetup interface, which enables people to organize in an ad hoc way based around a series of interests, right? On top of that, they then propose a series of infrastructures, adaptable furniture, collapsible structures, and so forth, together with a set of mobile technologies, such as a kind of portable Wi-Fi network, and so forth, which begins to ask what happens when we can think about the way to design cities or to shape the experience of public space in cities, not just through material means, but also through the actions, right? Sort of programming and coordinating actions and different ways of occupying the city. And and how do those modes of occupancy recontextualize the city itself? So where does the city begin? Where does the office end? Where does the office end, and then where does the city begin? Those are the projects. In addition to the projects, there are a series of essays which we attempted to somehow frame a set of, I wouldn't say polemical, but at least in a somewhat didactic way, some of the issues which are at play here. And again, this is not an attempt to sort of narrate a kind of unified condition, but again, to try to find a way to organize a debate about, in the present, about what kind of future we might want. So in other words, if we understand architecture perhaps not as a formal investigation, but as a question of spatial intelligence, right? The framework shifts in the sense that what we do and what we might do as architects changes. What new sites of practice, what working methods might we find might become appropriate. And I think to the extent if we think about it as spatial intelligence, then spatial intelligence for whom, right? Are we talking about the spatial intelligence just of humans? Are we talking about other forms of what can we learn from the way, for example, monkeys or birds, right, organize their space? And I'm not going to go through and talk about each of these essays, I think, because what we're going to try to do is shift the debate here to one which is really speaking more about the question of the public. And it's right at this moment where I think I'm going to sort of stop my introduction, and we're going to maybe, I guess, sort of open this up to short questions, but to shift and to just for the moment hold on to this idea of the public, right? Where if each of these projects, whether we're dealing with a kind of horizontally distributed notion of the commons, as in natural fuse, or if we're looking at interface to public waterways as actually a site of practice for architecture, or if we're understanding the things like public street furniture as a public, if we're entering, and this is a question, if we're entering a condition where public space is no longer the geography of the public sphere, which is to say that the notion of the public, or perhaps more correctly, or more precisely, the publics, where public opinion is formed, is no longer specifically a physical condition. It's no longer wholly resident in the physical city. Then how do we begin to address these new forms of publics in public space? And I think Martijn is going to go into a little bit more depth along those issues. But I'll leave it there, and maybe we can try to have a few questions at this point. Yeah?
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, right, yeah.